The Christening Gown. Chapter 1. The Name in the Dust. Concord, Massachusetts, 2024. The old stone church, a bastion of quiet history in a town steeped in it, felt like a refuge. Sarah Lancaster, 48, a restorer of sacred art and icons, had sought its ancient walls not just for work, but for solace. The silence within was a balm to the raw wound in her soul, a wound left by the sudden, crushing loss of her son, James. His laughter, his small hand in hers, his bright, inquisitive eyes, they haunted her, an ache that no amount of prayer or quiet work seemed to diminish. She'd moved across the country, seeking a new beginning, a place where the air didn't echo with the phantom sound of his name. Her current task, to inventory and preserve forgotten artifacts in the church's dusty, cavernous attic. Sunlight filtered through grimy dormer windows, illuminating motes dancing in the heavy air. Ancient hymnals, tarnished chalices, faded tapestries. Each item held a whisper of forgotten lives. Deep in a corner, beneath a shroud of cobwebs, she found it. A small, sturdy wooden box, unmarked and unadorned. Curiosity, a flicker of light in her often somber days, prompted her to open it. Inside, nestled among brittle, yellowed papers and a few tarnished silver trinkets, lay a folded garment. It was a christening gown, exquisitely hand-embroidered, its lace delicate, its fabric softened by age. It looked like something from a bygone era, a relic of generations past. Sarah unfolded it gently, careful not to damage the fragile material. The embroidery was intricate, a testament to skilled hands and loving care. As she smoothed the fine linen, her eyes fell upon the delicate stitching on the collar. A name, beautifully rendered in cursive, a name that made her heart seize, a name that clawed its way from the depths of her grief and echoed in the quiet attic. James. The world tilted. James, her James. The name of her son etched onto a christening gown, found in a forgotten box in the attic of a church, thousands of miles from where he had lived and died. A church with no connection to her family, her past, or her son. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was too precise, too cruel, too impossible. A wave of dizziness washed over her, the dusty air suddenly thick and suffocating. Her hands trembled, the delicate fabric of the gown rustling softly. This wasn't just a piece of history. It was a sinister message, or perhaps a profound, almost spiritual summons. How could this garment, bearing the name of her beloved, lost child, exist here, untouched for decades, waiting for her to find it? The universe seemed to be playing a cruel trick, or perhaps revealing a hidden truth. The quiet attic, once a haven of dusty tranquility, now felt charged with an electric energy, demanding answers to an impossible question. The name in the dust had awakened a mystery that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Sarah's carefully constructed new life. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Archives. The christening gown, with its impossibly familiar name, became an obsession for Sarah. Its presence in the forgotten attic of St. Jude's Episcopal Church felt less like a coincidence and more like a deliberate act of fate, a thread reaching out from the past to tug at her deepest wounds. Her grief for James, her son, was a constant companion, but now it was joined by a bewildering sense of mystery. She carefully carried the gown downstairs, its delicate fabric feeling heavy with unspoken stories. Father Michael, the elderly, kind-faced rector of St. Jude's, found her examining it in the vestry. He had seen the profound sadness in Sarah's eyes since she arrived, a quiet sorrow that clung to her like a shroud. "Ah, the old Mason christening gown," Father Michael said, his voice soft, recognizing the garment immediately. "It's a lovely piece, isn't it? Used for generations of firstborn sons in the Mason family, one of the oldest families in Concord." Sarah's heart pounded. "Mason?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on the embroidered name. "And James?" "Indeed," Father Michael nodded. "The last James Mason to be christened here would have been, around the early 2000s, I believe. Yes, James Oliver Mason." He paused, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "A tragic story, that family. They left town quite suddenly, shortly after little James was born. No one ever really knew why. Just vanished. The church kept some of their things, including that gown, hoping they'd return for it one day, but they never did." He gestured towards a back room. "You should talk to Emily Morgan. She's our church historian, been a parishioner here for over 70 years. Her memory is sharper than any archive. She knows every twig on every family tree in this town." Emily Morgan, a spry woman in her early 70s with bright, inquisitive eyes and a neatly coiffed silver bob, greeted Sarah with a warm smile in the church's small, cluttered archives room. When Sarah presented the christening gown, Emily's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, the Mason gown!" she exclaimed, her voice surprisingly strong. "Yes, James Oliver Mason. Blessed little lamb. A terrible shame what happened to them." Sarah, trying to keep her voice steady, asked, "What exactly happened, Emily?" "Father Michael said they vanished." Emily's smile faded. "It's a long, sad story, dear. The Masons were pillars of this community, generations of wealth and influence. Then, in the early 2000s, after James was born, a sudden, unexplained departure. Some whispered scandal. Some said a terrible illness that no one talked about. They sold their house quickly, left without a word. No one has heard from them since." She rummaged through a box of old photographs, her fingers surprisingly nimble. "Here, this is the Mason family. This would have been taken shortly after James was born." Emily handed Sarah a faded sepia photograph. It showed a distinguished-looking couple, clearly the elder Masons. Standing beside them was a younger couple, the parents of little James. The young man was tall, with kind eyes, but it was the young woman holding the swaddled infant who made Sarah gasp. Her face, the soft curve of her jaw, the way her dark hair framed her features, the very shape of her eyes. It was a face that felt profoundly, inexplicably familiar. Not like someone she knew, but like someone she was. A mirror from the past. "She looks so familiar," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily squinted at the photo. "That's Margaret Mason, the mother of little James. A beautiful woman, wasn't she? So gentle." Margaret Mason. The name resonated with a strange, unsettling echo in Sarah's mind. She had been adopted as a young child, and her adoptive parents, while loving, had always been reticent about her biological origins. Her adoptive mother, a quiet, almost secretive woman, had only ever said, "You have good, strong roots, Sarah. Your family was complicated, but you're a Lancaster now, and that's all that matters." A long-forgotten memory, a whisper from her childhood, flickered. Her adoptive mother, stroking her hair, saying, "The Lancasters always find their way home, Sarah." When destiny calls, they return to their roots. Sarah had always dismissed it as a comforting platitude. Now, it felt like a prophecy. The christening gown, the name James, the vanishing Mason family, and now the unsettling resemblance to Margaret Mason. It was all weaving into a complex, bewildering tapestry. The echoes in the archives were not just of a lost family. They were echoes of Sarah's own forgotten past, tugging her towards a truth she was not yet ready to comprehend. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Prophecy. The photograph of Margaret Mason, holding the infant James, haunted Sarah. The resemblance was too uncanny, too unsettling to dismiss as mere coincidence. It was a mirror reflecting a past she had meticulously tried to bury. A past her adoptive parents had guarded with quiet determination. The christening gown, once a symbol of her son's brief life, now felt like a direct, undeniable link to a family she didn't know, a name she didn't carry, yet whose features were undeniably her own. Her adoptive mother, a kind but deeply private woman, had always been vague about Sarah's origins. "Your birth family loved you, dear. But they couldn't care for you," she'd simply say, her eyes distant. Sarah had accepted it, never pressing, respecting the unspoken boundaries. Now, those boundaries felt like a cage, keeping her from a vital truth. The prophecy, or rather, the comforting saying her adoptive mother had often repeated, "The Lancasters always find their way home, Sarah. When destiny calls, they return to their roots," now felt less like a platitude and more like a direct, almost mystical directive. Had her adoptive mother known? Had she been hinting at something profound, something Sarah was only now ready to uncover? Father Michael, observing Sarah's deepening immersion in the Mason family history, suggested she look through the church's baptismal records. "They go back centuries," he mused. "Perhaps something there will shed more light." With Emily Morgan's keen eye and encyclopedic knowledge of local genealogy, they began to pore over dusty, leather-bound ledgers. The records were meticulously kept, revealing generations of Masons, their births, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. They quickly found the entry for James Oliver Mason, baptized on a crisp autumn day in 2002. His parents, William and Margaret Mason. His godparents, local community members. And here, Emily pointed, her finger tracing a faded entry from 1976. Another Mason, Margaret Elizabeth Mason, baptized here herself, daughter of Thomas and Eleanor Mason. She paused, her brow furrowing. "But there's an earlier entry for the Mason family." "Yes, here." Emily's finger hovered over an entry from 1975, a baptism for Sarah May Mason, daughter of Thomas and Eleanor Mason. Sarah's breath hitched. Sarah May Mason, the same year she was born. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet of the archives. Could that be me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily looked up, her expression a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. It's certainly possible, dear. Same first name, same family. The dates align with what you've said about your birth year." She then looked at the records of Thomas and Eleanor Mason, seeing that their first child was indeed listed as Sarah May Mason. She then found the entry for Margaret Elizabeth Mason, born a year later to the same parents. "Margaret was indeed your younger sister then, not your mother." A profound realization washed over Sarah. Margaret, the woman in the photo, holding the infant James, was not her mother, but her sister, her biological sister. And James, the infant in the photo, her nephew. the first James Mason in the family line, the one who was baptized in that gown, was her younger brother. Her own son had been named after his uncle, a brother Sarah had never known she had. But if Margaret was her sister, and Thomas and Eleanor Mason were her biological parents, why was she adopted? And why had her adoptive mother been so vague? Emily, sensing the profound revelation, gently continued to search. She found a faint, handwritten note in the margin of the 1975 entry for Sarah May Mason. Adopted by maternal aunt Martha Lancaster due to unforeseen circumstances. Martha Lancaster, her adoptive mother. The truth, long buried, exploded into Sarah's consciousness. Her adoptive mother wasn't just a kind woman who took her in. She was her biological mother's sister, her aunt. The unforeseen circumstances were still a mystery, but the family connection, the lineage, was undeniable. Sarah was a Mason by blood and a Lancaster by nurture. The unspoken prophecy had come true. She had returned to her roots, drawn back by a christening gown, a name, and a mysterious family history. Her son James, unknowingly named after his biological uncle, had become the catalyst for her homecoming. The gown wasn't a cruel trick. It was a map, guiding her back to her origin. The echoes in the archives had finally revealed the full, bewildering truth of her identity, transforming her grief into a complex tapestry of rediscovery and profound belonging. Chapter 4: The Threads of Blood. The revelation that Martha Lancaster, her adoptive mother, was in fact her biological aunt, and that she, Sarah, was a Mason by birth, landed with the force of an earthquake. It explained so much. The vague answers about her past, the subtle hints about roots and coming home, the uncanny resemblance to Margaret Mason. Margaret, her biological sister, not her mother, and little James, the baby in the photo, her nephew, not her brother. Her own son, James, named unknowingly after his deceased uncle. The threads of blood, long invisible, suddenly made themselves profoundly, inextricably known. Sarah felt a complex swirl of emotions. Shock, a sense of betrayal at the decades of silence, but also a strange, almost exhilarating sense of completion. The missing piece of her identity, the gaping hole in her personal narrative, was finally being filled. She recalled memories of Martha Lancaster, her adoptive mother. Martha had been a quiet, strong woman, deeply loving, but always holding a part of herself back, a part that Sarah now understood was burdened by this unspoken secret. Sarah never saw any ill intent in her adoptive mother, only a deep desire to protect her from a past that must have been fraught with pain. Father Michael, a silent, comforting presence, encouraged Sarah to explore the unforeseen circumstances mentioned in the baptismal record. "Family secrets, Sarah," he said gently, "are often born of love, however misguided the silence may seem in retrospect. There's always more to the story." Emily Morgan, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of historical excavation, delved deeper into the Mason family archives. Beyond the church records, she found old newspaper clippings, community newsletters, and even personal letters donated years ago by a distant Mason relative. The picture that emerged was one of immense pressure and quiet tragedy. Thomas and Eleanor Mason, Sarah's biological parents, were indeed pillars of the community, but their marriage, Emily discovered, had been strained by expectation and hidden struggles. Thomas was a brilliant but volatile man, prone to bouts of depression. Eleanor was gentle but fragile. When Sarah May was born in 1975, the unexpected arrival of a child had plunged them into crisis. Eleanor suffered from severe postpartum depression. exacerbated by Thomas's own struggles and the immense pressure to maintain their family's perfect facade. Martha Lancaster, Eleanor's sister, had stepped in, offering to care for the infant Sarah, initially as a temporary measure. But as Eleanor's depression lingered and Thomas became increasingly distant, Martha, already single and with a deep love for the baby, made the painful decision to adopt Sarah fully, providing her with the stable home her biological parents simply couldn't. It was an act of profound love and sacrifice on Martha's part, protecting Sarah from the turbulent environment of her birth home. The records showed that a year later, in 1976, Eleanor and Thomas welcomed their second child, Margaret Elizabeth Mason, Sarah's biological sister. And then, much later, in 2002, came James Oliver Mason, Sarah's biological nephew. But what happened to James, my nephew, the baby in the gown? Sarah asked, her voice tight with anticipation. And why did the Masons vanish so completely? Emily found a series of alarming newspaper clippings from late 2002 and early 2003. Little James Oliver Mason, just a few months old, had suffered from a rare, undiagnosed heart condition. He had passed away suddenly, just a few months after his baptism. The loss of their infant son had shattered Thomas and Eleanor. Already fragile, their marriage crumbled under the weight of this new, unimaginable grief. Compounding their sorrow, a series of questionable financial decisions by Thomas had come to light, threatening to expose the Mason family's once impeccable reputation. Overwhelmed by grief, scandal, and the loss of their cherished son, Thomas and Eleanor Mason had simply sold everything, packed up, and left Concord, disappearing into anonymity. Margaret, their only surviving child, would have been around 26 at the time. Her life also devastated by the loss of her infant brother and the sudden dissolution of her family. The story was one of immense sorrow and quiet desperation, a family undone by a confluence of illness, grief, and hidden vulnerabilities. Sarah understood now. Her adoptive mother hadn't lied. She had protected her. She had shielded her from the pain and chaos of a family struggling to survive. The christening gown, a silent witness to generations of Masons, was more than just an artifact. It was a tangible link to a cycle of love, loss, and resilience. It wasn't just Sarah's son's name on the gown. It was the name of her biological nephew, her little brother James, a symbolic bridge connecting her own profound grief to the ancestral sorrows of her birth family. The threads of blood had not only revealed her identity, but had also given a deeper, more poignant meaning to the name of her own lost son, tying him irrevocably to her newfound roots. Chapter 5, A Name Carried. The weight of the revelations settled upon Sarah, a complex blend of sorrow for her biological family's pain, gratitude for her adoptive mother's selfless love, and a profound, almost spiritual sense of coming home. She was Sarah Mason, carried into the world by struggling parents, and then Sarah Lancaster, lovingly nurtured by her aunt, and in a cosmic echo, her own son, James, carried the name of his biological uncle, connecting him to a lineage Sarah had never known existed. "So my James," Sarah whispered to Father Michael and Emily, holding the delicate christening gown. "He carries the name of his uncle, my biological brother, who died as an infant, long before I ever knew his name existed." Emily nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "It is often said that names carry vibrations, dear. Perhaps your James was meant to carry that name, to bring you back to this place, to uncover this truth." The christening gown was no longer just a relic from a forgotten box. It was a sacred artifact, a tangible link across generations, a symbol of intertwined destinies. It represented not only the joy of birth and the sorrow of loss, but also the enduring power of lineage and the mysterious ways in which the past reaches out to shape the present. Sarah felt a profound shift in her grief for her son. The raw, searing pain that had clung to her like a shroud began to soften, transforming into a more tender, expansive sorrow. Her James wasn't just hers, he was part of a larger story, connected to a family history she was only now discovering. His name, a source of such pain after his death, now felt imbued with a deeper meaning, a resonance with his uncle's brief life, a bridge across time. She thought of her adoptive mother, Martha Lancaster, now long gone. Martha, who had carried this secret with quiet dignity, protecting Sarah from a past she believed would only bring pain. Sarah felt an immense wave of love and forgiveness for her aunt, understanding the immense sacrifice and love that had driven her silence. Martha had not hidden Sarah's past out of malice, but out of a profound desire to give her a stable, loving home. The impulse to restore the church and its artifacts, which had brought Sarah to Concord, now felt less like a search for distraction and more like a preordained journey. She was meant to be here, in this very church, to find that very box, to unravel this very mystery, the unspoken prophecy of the Lancasters returning to their roots had manifested in the most unexpected and deeply personal way. Sarah now had a new mission: to understand the lives of her biological parents, Thomas and Eleanor, and her sister, Margaret. The records showed no deaths for them in Concord. They'd simply vanished. Were they still alive? Had Margaret, her sister, found peace after the double tragedy of losing her infant brother and seeing her family unravel? She began to search, methodically, cautiously, using the information Emily had gathered about their departure and leveraging the extensive genealogical resources available online. Sarah began tracing the Mason family's movements after they left Concord. It was a painstaking process, but each small clue, each confirmed detail, brought her closer to understanding the full tapestry of her origins. The burden of unspoken grief for her son, James, eased with each step she took towards understanding her own roots. His name, once a symbol of an unbearable loss, was now a name carried, a torch passed down a lineage, a vital connection to a past she was reclaiming. The christening gown, carefully preserved, lay in the church's archives, no longer a forgotten relic, but a central piece of Sarah's own unfolding story. A story of grief, discovery, and the profound, enduring power of a name. Chapter 6. The Whispers of Margaret. The search for Margaret Mason, Sarah's biological sister, became a driving force, intertwining with her newfound understanding of her own roots. Armed with the knowledge of her biological parents' tragic history, Thomas and Eleanor's struggles, the devastating loss of baby James, and their subsequent disappearance, Sarah felt an intense desire to find her sister, the last known living link to her birth family. Emily Morgan, always eager to assist in uncovering local history, proved invaluable. She remembered faint whispers in the town after the Masons left. Some said Margaret went to live with an aunt in California, Emily mused one afternoon, sifting through old community bulletins. Eleanor, her mother, had a sister out west. Maybe that's where she ended up. California, a vast state, but a lead nonetheless. Sarah widened her online search, focusing on Margaret Elizabeth Mason, born in 1976, with potential connections to California. She looked for marriage records, professional licenses, anything that might trace a life lived after the profound losses of 2003. It was a slow, painstaking process. Sarah often found herself sitting for hours, the christening gown laid out on a table in the vestry, its embroidered James, a silent companion. She felt an almost spiritual connection to it, as if the gown itself was guiding her, a tangible link to the past she was so desperately trying to piece together. One evening, after weeks of fruitless searching, a name surfaced in an online professional directory: Margaret Elizabeth Thompson, a licensed therapist specializing in grief counseling, practicing in Northern California. The birth date matched. The maiden name, Mason, was listed. A wave of both excitement and trepidation washed over Sarah. Could this be her sister, a therapist specializing in grief? The irony was not lost on Sarah, given Margaret's own devastating losses. Sarah drafted a careful email. She introduced herself as Sarah Lancaster, mentioning her work as a restorer at St. Jude's Episcopal Church in Concord, Massachusetts. She then cautiously explained her discovery of the Mason family christening gown, the name James, and the subsequent archival research. She hinted at a deeper, personal connection, inviting Margaret to contact her if the name Mason resonated. She attached a photo of the christening gown, and crucially, the old photograph of Margaret as a young woman holding baby James. The reply came within 24 hours. It was short, a single line: "Call me, now," followed by a phone number. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed. The voice on the other end was clear, professional, yet held a tremor of raw emotion. "This is Margaret Thompson." "Margaret," Sarah began, her voice thick with emotion. "This is Sarah Lancaster. I sent you an email. I think we might be sisters." There was a long silence, then a shaky breath. "My God," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "Sarah May? My older sister? I always wondered. My Aunt Martha, she told me about you once, briefly. She said you were safe, loved." Tears were audible in her voice. "The christening gown, it was ours, our families, and James, my baby brother." Margaret, now in her late 40s, poured out her story. After the tragic death of baby James and the subsequent unraveling of their parents' marriage and reputation, Margaret had fled Concord with her mother, Eleanor, who was broken by grief. Her father, Thomas, had disappeared completely, unable to cope. Eleanor had passed away years later, still consumed by sorrow, never fully recovering from the loss of James. Margaret had found solace in helping others navigate grief, understanding it from a deeply personal place. She had always carried the ghost of her family's past, especially the memory of her infant brother James, and the older sister, Sarah May, she had only dimly heard about from her Aunt Martha. Martha, Sarah's adoptive mother, had indeed maintained a quiet, sporadic correspondence with Eleanor and Margaret, ensuring them that Sarah was well, but never revealing Sarah's location, respecting Sarah's desire for a fresh start. And I saw the photo of the gown, and then the picture of me with baby James. Margaret choked out. It was like a punch to the gut. All those memories. And then you, my sister, my older sister. The conversation lasted for hours, a flood of shared history, explanations, and emotional releases. Sarah recounted her life, her own deep grief for her son, James, and the incredible journey that had led her to the church, the gown, and now to Margaret. "I named my son James," Sarah explained, her voice soft. "I didn't know why. It just felt right. Now I know. He carried his uncle's name. He brought me home. Margaret wept openly. My little brother, and your son, a connection across all this time. The christening gown, with its embroidered name, had not just led Sarah to her biological sister. It had woven a profound connection between her lost son and her forgotten family, bringing full circle the cycle of love, loss, and the enduring threads that bind generations. The whispers of Margaret had finally found their voice, and in doing so, had healed an untold story of loss and redemption for two sisters. Chapter 7, The Unbroken Circle. The discovery of Margaret, her biological sister, was a watershed moment for Sarah. The phone calls. Bridging the vast expanse between Massachusetts and California became lifelines of shared history, grief, and an exhilarating sense of belonging. Margaret, a therapist specializing in grief, understood Sarah's pain over her son, James, on a profound level, having lived through the raw, unaddressed sorrow of losing her infant brother by the same name. It's like our grief for our Jameses echoed across time, drawing us together, Margaret once said, her voice filled with wonder. A cosmic appointment arranged by two little boys and an old christening gown. Sarah felt a deep sense of relief. The void left by her son's death, which had driven her to Concord, was not just filled, but transformed. Her James was not just a singular loss. He was connected to a lineage, a larger story, his name a bridge between generations. This understanding didn't diminish her sorrow, but it gave it context, a sense of belonging to a continuous stream of life and love. Margaret flew to Concord. The reunion at the church, under the gentle gaze of Father Michael and the beaming smile of Emily Morgan, was deeply emotional. The two sisters, separated by circumstance and decades of silence, embraced, their faces wet with tears. Emily, having witnessed generations of Concord's history, openly wept at the culmination of the Mason family's hidden saga. "The gown," Margaret whispered, touching the carefully preserved christening gown in the vestry. "It's so beautiful. I remember my mother, Eleanor, telling me stories about it, how every firstborn Mason's son was christened in it. I remember the day little James wore it. It was the only thing she packed, the only family heirloom she clung to when we left. She meant to send for it. She couldn't bear to look at it, but she couldn't bear to part with it either." Sarah now fully understood the depth of her biological mother, Eleanor's grief, a grief so profound it had led to her family's retreat and eventual dissolution. The christening gown was a tangible piece of that unresolved sorrow, waiting patiently to tell its story. The sisters spent days in Concord, revisiting old Mason family properties, looking at faded photographs Emily provided, and piecing together the fragmented lives of their parents. They learned about Thomas Mason's struggles with depression and the financial pressures that had finally broken him. They explored Eleanor's artistic spirit and her gentle, fragile nature. They found a measure of peace in understanding their parents, no longer as mysterious figures, but as complex human beings caught in a web of personal and generational challenges. Sarah took Margaret to her adoptive mother, Martha's grave. "She loved me, Margaret," Sarah said, a gentle smile on her face. "She protected me. She carried this secret to give me a stable life. I understand now." Margaret nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their aunt's selfless sacrifice. The work on the church, the restoration of icons and artifacts, continued, but now with a deeper sense of purpose for Sarah. She wasn't just restoring wood and paint. She was helping to restore the spiritual tapestry of a community, a tapestry that now included her own family's intricate threads. The church, which had initially been a sanctuary from her grief, had become the very crucible of her healing, leading her back to her roots and her lost sister. They talked about the christening gown. Sarah suggested they donate it permanently to the church for future generations. "It's not just a Mason heirloom anymore," Sarah explained. "It's a symbol of hope, of connection, of how destiny works in mysterious ways. It brought me home. It brought you home." Margaret readily agreed. The cycle was unbroken. The gown, bearing the name James, a name carried by her lost son and her lost brother, was now a testament to enduring connections. Sarah, who had sought solace in a new town after profound loss, had found not just a new purpose, but her origins, her family, and a sister who understood the deepest parts of her soul. The circle of life, loss, and rediscovery had finally closed, leaving a legacy of grace and a profound understanding that some threads, once woven, can never truly be broken. Chapter 8: The Legacy of James. The christening gown, meticulously preserved, now rested in a specially designed display case within the archives of St. Jude's Episcopal Church, a silent testament to a story spanning generations and intertwined destinies. Engraved on a small brass plaque beneath it were the words, "The Mason Family Christening Gown, symbol of new beginnings, enduring lineage, and the unbreakable circle of life and love. Dedicated in memory of James Oliver Mason and James Arthur Lancaster." The naming of her son James, a seemingly random choice in her grief, now held profound meaning for Sarah. It was a subconscious echo, a thread pulling her towards her biological family, a bridge connecting her personal tragedy to a deeper ancestral narrative. Her James, in his brief life, had not only touched her heart, but had, in his naming, unknowingly led her back to her roots, to her sister, Margaret, and to the understanding of her true identity. Sarah and Margaret's sisterhood blossomed, a vibrant, life-affirming force. They shared holidays, celebrated birthdays, and supported each other through life's inevitable challenges. Their conversations were a rich blend of present-day joys and ongoing explorations of their shared past, continually weaving new threads into the family tapestry. They began to research other branches of the Mason family tree, not just to uncover more relatives, but to understand the broader context of their ancestors' lives in Concord. The church, for Sarah, became more than just a workplace. It was a spiritual home, the very nexus of her healing and rediscovery. She continued her work as an iconographer and restorer, now imbuing each stroke of her brush with a deeper understanding of the sacredness of history and the enduring presence of past lives. Father Michael and Emily Morgan, witnessing the profound transformation in Sarah, often spoke of her story as a miracle, a testament to God's mysterious ways. Emily, invigorated by the dramatic reveal of the Mason family history, dedicated herself to documenting and preserving other local family histories, ensuring no more stories would be lost to silence or time. Her archives became a beacon for others seeking their own pasts. Sarah's grief for her son, while never fully disappearing, had transformed. It was no longer a suffocating burden, but a hallowed memory, imbued with purpose. She found solace in talking about him, sharing his story, and celebrating his brief but impactful life. The name James, once a source of unbearable pain, was now a name of connection, of lineage, a precious link to both her biological and her chosen family. She often visited the christening gown in the church archives, running her fingers gently over the embroidered name. It was a physical manifestation of an unbroken circle: birth, loss, hidden connections, and miraculous rediscovery. The gown held the whispers of generations, of joy and sorrow, of beginnings and endings, and the promise of enduring love. Sarah Lancaster, the grieving mother who sought solace in a new town, had found not just a new purpose, but her identity, her family, and a profound sense of belonging. The journey, initiated by a simple wooden box in a dusty attic, had brought her full circle, revealing the intricate dance of destiny and the deep, abiding truth that even in loss there is connection, and in rediscovery there is profound, enduring grace. The legacy of James, both the nephew and the son, lived on, not just in memory, but in the vibrant, interconnected lives of a family reunited, anchored by the threads of a sacred name.